It was a unique paradigm shifting experience that helped us really understand.
That's really our danger time. That's a time that if we're not clear on what we want to be doing there and what really contributes value, it's super easy for kind of passive activities to fill that void.
Yeah, it's an important question to ask yourself of why am I doing this? Is it for me or is it for the way that it looks for others?
So what that means is that we're finding a place for stuff that doesn't actually even contribute value to our lives.
Welcome to the Living Life Our Way podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping you live intentionally. Our goal is to take back control of our lives by living life on our terms. Join us as we work towards living life our way.
Welcome back. I'm Troy.
And I'm Jeff. And last week we talked a little bit about mistakes we make in how we value items.
Right, that we oftentimes have a perceived value of something that is very different from the actual value that that thing contributes to our life.
So today we thought we'd talk a little bit about how that impacts certain areas of our lives. The first of which is finances.
So the way that making mistakes in how we value items impacts our financial condition is by impairing the ability that we have to make real choices in how we spend our money.
Right. The more intentional we are in our finances and consumption, the better off we feel kind of downstream in the other areas of our lives.
Right. And we've talked a little bit about consumerism and materialism. And the problem with those is that they encourage us to spend our money on things that don't contribute value to our life.
And this impedes our financial security and our ability to have resources for those things that actually do matter.
As it relates to the financial area of our life, our goal is to have control so that what we're using our money for is what is producing value in our lives. And so having control by making those informed decisions, those intentional decisions about how we spend money is where that freedom comes from. That is freedom. We are governing our money. Our money is not governing us in the form of consumerism and materialism that encourages us to spend on things that don't have value.
Yeah, so one thing that my wife and I found our first year of marriage was this budget system called YNAB. And the whole premise of it is give your dollars a job.
Yeah, and what that means is that you're setting up choices so that if you spend money in going out to dinner, that is money that has that job and it's not available for something else. And so what we found is we've developed our own budgeting system is that it's essential that we identify those things that have real value, making sure we're putting enough money to work on those things that have our greatest value.
Yeah, apportioning the correct amount of dollar workers for that job.
Right, and that only comes from making sure that the value that you assign or your perception of value that you assign to those things aligns with the value that they actually provide and the fulfillment that they actually provide.
Yeah, so like Troy mentioned, although we don't use YNAB anymore, it was a unique paradigm shifting experience that helped us really understand. And that's been something that in my marriage with my wife has been really a strong suit of ours is controlling our finances. Now we have a lot of work to do in other areas of our lives, but that's been something that's been a huge blessing is that kind of thought process of each dollar gets a job. Make sure it's for things that you want it to go towards.
For sure. The key then is to make sure that we're making intentional decisions in how we use our dollars.
And making sure we don't make mistakes in how we're valuing those things.
A really important area of life that we often spend a lot of money in is in recreation and adventure.
And incorrectly valuing that recreation and adventure can really lead to some interesting experiences where you have something that may be perceived as valuable by others, but to you has no inherent value.
So this last summer, we had the opportunity to go over to St. Andrews in Scotland for the 150th British Open. We'd always wanted to go to a major golf tournament, and it just happened to be at the birthplace of golf and provided us an opportunity to go to Scotland, which I've always wanted to do.
Yeah, we've been putting our name in the ballot for the Masters, the Open, the US Open for years, and this was the first time we actually got tickets.
And it was a lot of fun to go over there, but because it was historic, the 150th anniversary, it was an absolute madhouse. It was packed. And what we noticed as we got closer to the tournament is that the resale market for tickets absolutely skyrocketed. In fact, we even considered selling our tickets because prices got so high.
Yeah, it's amazing that there's these events, these recreational activities that because they have Instagram value, people want to go to. It's not necessarily for the activity, it's so that they can brag about it on Instagram.
Yeah, and we certainly aren't disparaging anyone's intention for going over there, but it was interesting as we walked around the course that there were a lot of people who seemed to not even be paying attention to what was going on the course. It seemed like they were much more interested in making sure they got the right selfie shot down the fairway on the 18th hole or some other place than actually being present in the activity that we were there to participate in.
Yeah, one of the things that was manifest is there was this really popular place to sit and watch golf. It was on this area where you could see 4 holes. And so everyone around us was just enjoying golf. But at the end of the day, when the last golfers had come through, we ended up walking down the ropes. And by a lot of the tee boxes, spectators were kind of heckling the golfers. They weren't really paying attention. They were taking selfies because they were closer to the golfers. Seemed like there was kind of this division in people where there was the people who were there to watch the golf and enjoy the event, and there was the people who were there for the social outing and to kind of brag about it on social media.
Right. And again, who knows what anyone was there for? We're not trying to disparage anyone's intention, but there is a danger in recreation, adventure, that we're doing it for someone else. That the idea is that we get that perfect photo that we can put on Instagram or on TikTok and get some accolades. And that's where we sort of are placing the value of those activities versus designing activities or picking activities that really have value to us and that really create fulfillment for us.
Yeah, it's an important question to ask yourself of, why am I doing this? Is it for me or is it for the way that it looks for others?
For sure. And one thing that's kind of interesting is the word recreation. It's intended to renew, it's intended to recreate and help us kind of re-energize ourselves. So if our recreational pursuits or the adventures that we're seeking aren't really doing that, but are really just intended to be a bit of a brag, it's something to consider.
Yeah, a real question is this something that has value for me or is this for an audience?
Another place where misalignment between our perception of value and the actual value of things for us creates problems as it relates to organization or time and home management.
Yeah, not having clear value is a direct path to clutter.
So we recently finished our cleaning experiment, and it was great. In fact, we've continued the process of keeping the house clean in 20 minutes a day, 5 days a week. But the challenge that we noticed in that cleaning experiment was items that don't create real value for us.
Yeah, they pose organizational challenges because we don't want to have to move them out of the way and increase the time we're spending cleaning.
So what that means is that we're finding a place for stuff that doesn't actually even contribute value to our lives.
Yeah, again, just kind of becomes clutter.
Right. So if we're trying to improve the organization of our lives, one great way to do it is to identify those things that aren't contributing value and get rid of them.
And another thing that we end up wasting a lot of is time. If we don't have a clear idea of how we're spending our time or a clear method of managing how we're spending our time, a lot of it ends up just getting wasted.
Right. So we're using our time in ways that don't create value. And it's because of this imbalance between the perceived value and the actual value. For me, TV is a great example of that. I oftentimes think at night, it's been a long day. I just want to sit down and relax. And I'll flip on the TV and suddenly an hour, 2 hours have gone by. And at the end of that, I don't really feel rested. I don't really feel particularly renewed.
Yeah, the other day we were talking about discretionary time, the time outside of work and maybe sleep.
Right. What we were talking about is that's really our danger time. That's a time that if we're not clear on what we want to be doing there and what really contributes value, it's super easy for kind of passive activities to fill that void.
Like TV, it's just so easy to do that. It's easy to fill that time with things that don't necessarily matter, but there's a real opportunity there to use that time in an effective way.
Yeah, so the idea of making intentional choices, identifying those alternative activities that we could participate in, understanding the value that they contribute to us so that when we're looking at just sitting down and watching TV. We understand the opportunity cost, that there is something of higher value that we could be doing.
Yeah, and a program we've been developing focuses really on this. We call them MOLOs, things that we want more of and less of. So in the evenings, when we have our biggest block of discretionary time, we need to focus on activities that really amplify what we want more of and minimize what we want less of.
That's right. So making those intentional choices really comes down to understanding the relative value of different activities.
Yeah, we need to optimize our life for our MOLOs.
When we look at how misalignment in perceived value and actual value impact our lives, the biggest area of impact is in our emotional or mental or spiritual well-being.
Yeah, as we've discussed these areas of our lives, we've found that the emotional and mental kind of well-being, there's a reason that that's talked about so much in society these days, is because it kind of bleeds into a lot of other areas of our lives.
Right. What we're looking for is fulfillment, for a sense of peace. The problem with making mistakes in perceived value versus actual value is that it creates cognitive dissonance of sorts. We expect certain things to provide us fulfillment, to provide us that peace. And when they don't, it creates a lot of dissatisfaction, anxiety, depression. So much of that really relates to this idea that we are not satisfied or we're not feeling fulfilled with what we're getting out of life. And there's nothing more dangerous as it relates to that than this idea of value in something that is significantly different than the value that it actually provides us.
Yeah, I think consumerism, materialism, the reason that they're so appealing is they're suggesting that physical items solve these emotional or mental or spiritual problems that we're facing. They fill the void, but it's such a short-term fix for something that's not short-term fixable.
Right, because when you buy something, you really may have that dopamine spike that feels really good, but that just isn't going to persist, and that isn't a replacement for being in a good place mentally or emotionally or spiritually where you have internal peace.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about a study that came out from The Ohio State University. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that relates?
Sure. It was interesting. They evaluated a number of different treatments for depression to see what was most effective. And of all the treatments that they tested, kindness to other people proved to be most effective.
That's so interesting because it seems like that's completely antithetical to what consumerism and materialism suggests does create value for
Sure.
us.
The study really highlights to me the danger of expecting value to come from things that don't provide that type of value. When we expect that new stuff or enough Instagram likes or popularity, whatever it is, when we expect those things to fulfill us emotionally and mentally and spiritually, we're setting ourselves up for some really challenging times. Those things don't have intrinsic or inherent value. They don't. And beyond that, oftentimes they're things that we can't control anyway. So finding those things in our lives, whether it's items or uses of time and energy, finding those things that really create true value and that do fulfill us is powerful.
Yeah, again, it's just figuring out those MOLOs. We've talked a little bit about the cat from Alice in Wonderland, and the lesson is, if you don't know where you want to get, it doesn't really matter which way you go.
And in no other area of our life is that more important than mental, emotional, spiritual health.
And the thing that makes that tough is that a lot of those things that provide value in that area of our life aren't waypoints. They're not destinations. They're how we travel. And that's really the problem with consumerism and materialism is those are different ways to travel that are going to make the journey a lot harder.
That's right. And the takeaway is across all the areas of our life, it's really important that we're careful in how we assess value of things, that we make sure that it's not a perceived value and that it's not a value that belongs to someone else, but it's really what's valuable to us.
Yeah, it's been really interesting going through this practice of daily gratitude. Focusing on gratitude has made me better at understanding the true value of things. And that in turn has led to a lot more intentionality in my life.
And that, after all, is what we're looking for. So next week, we're going to be talking a little bit more about our cleaning experiment. So we'll see you next week.
Yeah, see you in the next one. If you found value in today's episode, subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps us out.